It's like you're on a phone with a.
I learned something new. I was actually going to. Okay, so. You okay?
Open properly.
Oh, we have plenty of time, so I don't have to worry too much about the mic.
Want me to do notes? Do you still want me to do notes?
If it's okay.
It's not a problem.
Okay.
They'll be offline and then I'll submit them into this.
Awesome. Thanks. I have a second person, Rakesh, but he's totally new.
Okay.
And so I told him to just do it in, oh, so somebody already started populating the notepad.
Okay.
So.
I take notes anyhow because I have to.
Yeah.
I'm there.
Thanks. Oh, what am I talking about?
Oh,
This
it's
is
just
my
the-
MD. Never mind. Somebody has not populated. I was going to.
I guess we'll start with our share slide.
Yes. Stop.
Remember.
Copy paste is not working. What is that? I don't see Rakesh. He was going to be my note taker. I might have to ask for a second one. I was trying to recruit people with note taking. So Peter is one, and we'll have to ask for a second one. Really?
Yep.
Okay.
You should.
Should we get us started? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. You are in the SCIM working group. So welcome to the first day. I guess this is the second session of the first day, and this is SCIM. So if you're not prepared to listen and discuss on system for cross-domain identity management, you are in the wrong room. And can those on remote hear us okay? Yeah? Okay, we're good to go. I keep losing the window. All right, next slide. Okay, so I think most of you may be familiar with the note well. It's just the IETF practices. I will let you guys read through the slide. Next slide. Okay, meeting tips. I think the only reminder that I will put here, and everyone's wearing masks. So If for some reason your mask breaks or you need a new one, we have some more here up and at the chairs table. For those that are remote, just make sure your audio and video are off unless you are presenting or you want to be in the queue. Headsets are strongly recommended. Next slide. Oh, go ahead.
If you are here in person, please do remember to use the on-site meeting tool to get in the queue to speak so we can coordinate with the remote people as well.
Yeah, that's to say we'll be using the Meet Echo queue, right, to call off. Okay, so just be courteous and professional and follow our IETF Code of Conduct practices. Next slide. Okay, so I will thank in advance Peter for being our note taker. I don't see Rakesh, so can we get a second note taker, please? And you are free to take notes as Peter will do separately, or you can use the Hedgedoc live for the second note taker. So can I get a second volunteer to take notes, please? We really can't move forward unless we have a second person. And it can be somebody who's remote. Peter. So awesome, Peter squared. Thank you. Peter Yi and Peter Kesselman, back there. He will not be on Hedgedoc, but you can be on Hedgedoc. Unless you prefer another tool. Do the Hedgedoc? Okay, thanks. Okay, so we've got the links. The minutes we'll post after the IETF meeting ends. And I think we're ready to go into the agenda bash. So we have one request. So you've got the agenda posted here. We have one request for our last presenter, Elliot, to actually be the first presenter.
Yeah, apologies. I've had to cover another presentation because a colleague has come down with COVID. If people can indulge me and allow me to go first, I'd appreciate it.
So are there any objections? Going once, going twice? Okay, so we will let Elliot, fine by us, was the note in the remote. So, we do, but I was just going to do one last, any other changes to the agenda or additions? Awesome, thank you. All right, so Elliot will be up first. Okay, so if you can just mail the notes after you're done to the chairs. Thanks. Skim for devices.
Okay, I think this is the part where I get to take my mask off, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Elliot Lear.
Can you get closer to the mic?
I don't think it's on.
No, it's not on.
I'm sure there's a button for this. All right. Thanks. All right, that sounds good. So my name
You can
is.
swap it if you
Oh,
need,
okay.
unless you like holding it.
I don't mind. My name is Elliot Lear. I work at Cisco. I'm presenting on behalf of myself, Muhammad Shahzad, who is hopefully participating remotely, Hassan Akbar. Now, Muhammad and Hassan are at NCSU, North Carolina State University, and we want to talk a little bit about SCIM for devices. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some of the questions that we have and that we think administrators will have, and actually some of the business to business community will have. So how do I provision a new device into enterprise infrastructure, or many new devices into enterprise infrastructure? And I might be an individual within the enterprise, or a partner to that enterprise. How do I establish bootstrapping credentials for that device? What are bootstrapping credentials in this case? A means by which the device can be introduced into the enterprise or deployment environment in a way in which in some notion of a secure way. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that in a little bit. How can I provide ancillary information about the device that's being introduced into the environment? One example of ancillary information might be a software bill of materials for that device. Another piece of ancillary information might be, in fact, what the device is. Another piece might be to leverage the manufacturer usage descriptions. And then the last question is, how might I get application API information? How might I exchange application API information, particularly for non-IP enabled devices? Clarifying question?
Yeah, just quick question. This is Rafat. When you say device, can you talk about what do you mean by a device? Right?
Oh, let's say a light bulb, a luminaire, a refrigerator. It's a good question. A thing, I always talk in terms of things, and to me, things are everything but general purpose computers that have displays and keyboards, right? We know how to add those things onto networks. We have great difficulty adding non-things onto networks. Sort of weird saying non-things, but there you have it. So there's a class of device that will require a data plane communications. Those are going to be devices that are only L2 enabled. And so they might want information on API level information on how to communicate with those L2 devices. So these are the questions that we've come across. Next slide, please. So I sort of introduced this concept, I think it was in a spring meeting, that we were thinking about SCIM for this. Well, yeah, now we're really thinking about SCIM. We're thinking about it such that a few of us have actually done some prototyping and a little bit of coding around this. And why not, right? What we want is something that SCIM, largely speaking, provides. A normalized set of schemas starting with a very small base. We don't want to really introduce any sort of technology religion around which onboarding technologies are in use, but allow for all of them to be used, allow for all the bootstrapping technologies to be explored through extension schemas. And in the draft, we provide a list of examples. And one of them is device provisioning protocol. We called it the Wi-Fi schema, but we probably should just rename it the DPP schema. And I'll talk about some of these things we need to change. We did something with BLE low energy and with Zigbee. And we've tested out these technologies such that we can make sure that they can interact with the various components such that devices can onboard onto a network. We're sort of looking for others, like what would we do for private 5G? How might this work for Matter and things like that? The table stakes for creating such a schema is to provide the deployment enough information to get the device to trust it, and so that it knows to trust the device, to have that mutual trust established. Next slide, please. So you might think there's got to be other things we could have used. Sort of the obvious one that people start talking about is, well, couldn't you have created a Yang model for all this? And couldn't you have used netconf or resconf? Well, in fact, what we're talking about here is something that isn't provisioning or touching the actual device, but rather something that is describing that device and specifically describing how to enable communication with that device. So it's a little bit different in terms of the purpose of netconf and Yang. It's no device config is exchanged, and there's no reusability here that we'd be benefiting if we had gone to netconf or Yang. So it's actually really right up the alley of SCIM in terms of doing provisioning operations. As we said when this working group was formed, CRUD, right? Create, read, update, and delete operations. Now, the other choice might have been SNMP, and this was just in a nightmare I had. Somebody said, "Come and do this with SNMP," and my only response to that was no. So we're not going to do SNMP. So that's why not other stuff. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have a couple of basic elements that are in a core schema. We tried to, roughly speaking, stay aligned with how SCIM was operating, right? You have a very small core, and then you expand using extensions. And so we have a couple of issues that we have to resolve around how to do that. None of us who are doing this work claim to be SCIM experts. So ID and meta look a lot like what they should be from core, from the original core schema. Admin state is a little information about the device. Schemas is from core. Connectivity refers to how to connect to the device, what sort of connectivity the device supports. A display name, what the thing might be, right? And MUD URL. And these are just, and you notice those last two are optional because perhaps you don't even have, much more information on that. These are sort of openers for us as we begin this process with a working group, and we begin to dialogue to say, well, maybe these are the things that need to be in the core. Maybe these things shouldn't be in device core. They should just pull back. We should pull back and even make device core even smaller. These are possibilities. We're really just getting going. But this is what we started with. And embarrassingly, the -00 of the draft forgot the core, which was sort of bad. But that was corrected today. If you look at the -01, it's got all these core objects in it. Apologies for that. Next slide.
So Elliot, if I can channel, there's a question on the chat from Massimiliano Pala.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, you mentioned it's not netconf resconf for the device, that he agrees, but wouldn't this be an infrastructure configuration and as such solvable using netconf resconf for the infrastructure?
Hi, Max. Maybe you could claim that, but the issue would be that this is really high up the stack. And netconf and restconf really work at a much lower point in the stack. You could think of it more as an analog, as almost like a radius diameter analog, if anything. So that's our thinking, at least. And again, we get no model reuse from netconf restconf in this case. So from our perspective, I think we're more comfortable in the SCIM world for this. It's exactly, sort of the CRUD operations that you would expect for provisioning. And we're not trying to do things like describe interfaces or IP addresses or any of that stuff. And in fact, the information we're communicating is entirely devoid of deployment information, how the thing is being deployed. It's just what the thing is and how to connect to it. Okay.
Yep.
I hope that answers your question, Max. Thanks. Okay, so is that Leaf? Hi.
Yes. Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. You?
Yeah, good.
Oh. There was significant work in the EDROM community towards Wi-Fi schema, or what you might call Wi-Fi schema. I mean, they have a lot of experience there about the challenges, and there's a lot of dragons buried and skeletons buried with respect to the platform providers in that space. I mean, if you're talking about deployability here, that it's going to be like really, really difficult. But I would encourage you to go talk to them, to go get a little bit of sort of, background information on what kind of, the problems they ran into in that.
Yeah, so before you walk away, I would just ask a favor, which is put me in touch with the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. Drop me an email. I'll just put it on the top of my stack. But yeah, that's a very, very useful conversation to have. On the other comment I was going to make is that when I I think that if you kind of put that kind of stuff, I mean, Wi-Fi schema is about sort of describing, what you need in order to connect to the device, right? But basically, when you put that stuff back into SCIM, I don't know how big of a difference it will be what netconf gets you today. I think you're going to wind up in more or less the same place.
Okay.
Okay, I need to pause here for a minute. So for the gentleman, we are following the IETF procedures and a mask is required. Thank you. Okay, so Elliot, I don't know how much more time you need, but you're beyond the 10 minutes.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, we've got plenty of time, so.
Hopefully there's many unanswered questions right now that we have to sort through. I'll just finish up relatively briefly.
I was going to give you a few more minutes.
Okay. So first, we know we have Phil and a few others have already provided comments. We want to incorporate those. We want to make sure we're using the right schema description method. Like right now, it's we're using JSON schema to describe this stuff. Some people would prefer OpenAPI. In fact, there's benefits of using OpenAPI in that you can fold comments onto 2 lines or 3 lines or however many lines you want, or descriptions into those many lines. And as we all know, JSON doesn't do a good job of that. And that particularly, now this might be the stupidest reason in the world to do this, but that makes it rather hard to just simply incorporate something into an internet draft, for instance. Whereas OpenAPI is a lot easier. We want to use a schema language, though. We want to use a formal schema language so that we can always make sure that we're formally verifying correctly, right? Not having a formal schema language would be very bad, we think. What needs to be normalized into and out of the device core is something that I think we need to pay a lot of attention to. And we already know that at least the Wi-Fi schema that we list, and this goes to Leif's point, is it's not really a Wi-Fi schema. It's really a provisioning schema for device provisioning protocol. And so again, it's more how does the device get introduced into the network? And so we can easily envision not just DPP, but FIDO device onboarding might be another approach that could be used. And in fact, we've talked to the FIDO people about that. And again, as Matter matures, I would expect that somebody will want to come forward for a Matter proposal right now. But Matter today, at least as published, doesn't suit the enterprise. Maybe it will. And when it does, then probably we'll want to go down that route too. Again, no technology religion. Maybe there's something to do with RFC 8366 vouchers. Happy to go there, right? The goal here is to do a level of introduction, at least at the network level. If people want to play at the application level later, that's a separate discussion as far as I'm concerned. So that's it. I think that was my last slide, right? Oh yeah, proposed work plan. Well, here's information as to, we're looking for reviewers, co-authors, detractors. People are free to take, to submit PRs, and would love to discuss and maybe adopt something next year, early next year. That's it. That really was it. Thanks.
Okay, hold on. Danny Zollner is in the queue, so if you want to get on the queue.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out how to do it from the
Oh, okay.
web, but
So
I'll do it from my phone.
We said we were going to honor the Meet Echo queue. So Danny, go ahead.
Hi, Elliot. I've got a couple bits of feedback for you. As I've written the draft study, I'm happy to connect with you offline to help you sort of straighten out and align with the schema. Put your schema in the IM schema.
Excuse me, Danny. Maybe slow down, step a little bit away. You're overmodulating a little bit. It's a little hard to understand you.
Uh-oh.
Try again.
Testing.
Yep, we can hear you. Just a little slower, a little softer.
Okay. Yeah, so to start, I'd be happy to help you with the representing the schema in the sort of the SCIM schema language. It's not entirely straightforward, but I've written a few drafts already, and I've had to sort of crack that egg already. So I can connect with you offline just to give you some pointers on that one. Secondly, I think we'd already discussed this a little over email, but I'll mention it here just for the record. Myself and a few other people have sort of in parallel been looking at doing or like representing non-physical device or like machine identities. Think I don't know, like any sort of like workload identity or the concept of like a service principal, which might be like a little like Azure or Microsoft, but you get the idea. Like a non-tangible, you cannot pick it up or turn it on like a light bulb, but I like thing that has access to an API. So I think we could potentially write those as two separate, completely separate drafts, or sort of figure out a way to just make it like an extension of schemas because you're building this in a sort of that dynamic schema model. I thought I had a third one, but I have forgotten. So maybe that's just the only two things that I talk about.
I'll briefly comment now, and then we'll take it offline. To number one, absolutely welcome your help. My preference would be for that to be non-normative, whereas the formal would be normative. And we can discuss that. On the second point that you made about Microsoft Azure workloads or other things like that, I think that's worthy of discussion to make sure that we're normalizing correctly, and happy to take that forward with you as well.
Okay, with that, thank you, Elliot.
Thank you.
So I think you've gotten some comments, and for those who have listened, please solicit the person who was in the queue left, so I presume you had no question left. So just continue to provide feedback and comment. It looks like the authors will continue to evolve the draft, and when they're ready, we can take a pulse then. Okay, so next up, Pam, we have you on the docket, but we didn't get a response from you. Didn't know if you could give us an update on the use cases draft.
Hey, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I have only a very small update, which is that I don't have a draft for you, but I do have a question for the group if you're willing to have me ask it.
Please, I gave you 5 minutes.
I thought so. All right, I just wanted to double check. So in doing my research, I ran into an area in the specification that was where I felt like the implementation was different from what the specification stated. And so I wanted to ask this group about external IDs and provisioning domains. It feels like there's an echo on your side. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay.
You might be hearing some of the issues because people are coming in and out and the door is slamming.
Oh, that could be. Okay. So provisioning domain is defined in 7643 in section 1.2. So you can all go take a look at it if you need to. But basically, it is defined as an administrative domain external to the domain of a service provider for different, and the example they give is a different legal entity. Right, so they have defined a provisioning domain as basically external domains, which may have one or more clients, I presume. So that's how they define a provisioning domain. And then in section 3.1, when they define an external ID, they define that external ID as being relative to the provisioning domain, and that there is a local mapping between the identifier of the provisioning domain and the SCIM server. So the implication there is that there should be a separate external ID for every provisioning domain that a SCIM server serves. Except that I don't think any of our implementations do that. So if I have, for example, especially in downstream provisioning, where the SCIM server, for example, could be an AWS, for example, right, an Amazon. I don't believe that there would be a separate external ID managed for every client that wants to interact with a given object or resource. So my question to this group, and maybe we can just answer it in the chat as everyone else keeps going, is there anyone here who runs a SCIM server that is mapping different external IDs to different provisioning domains. Okay,
So
because I don't
nobody in
believe we do.
Yeah, nobody in the room is reacting to that question, Pam. The other suggestion for you would be to post that question on the mail list.
Yes, I will do that right after this. Okay, because I think if that's the case, I wouldn't include the, then external ID really only is used, I believe, by the client that creates it, but it can be changed by any client. If the provisioning domain separation is not maintained, right? Then one client could create an object with a given external ID, and then another client that could be from a completely different provisioning domain may be able to change that external ID.
I guess my general question would be, would that be a good thing or not? Is that a desirable?
Right. And if it is, I think this comes back to some of the cardinality discussions as well, and mutability, right?
Yep. So I mean, I would post that into the mail list as well. I mean,
okay.
I can look at it from a flexibility, but I can also look at that as being a potential attack vector, right?
I would assume so. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for all of your, not exactly participation, but at least I know there's not a lot of concern or
Yep.
different usages. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Pam. Was that it?
I draft out though, so that people can review, and I'm hoping we can, with luck, adopt it for San Francisco.
Okay. Okay, with that, we're into SCIM roles and entitlements. Danny?
Well, thank you, Nancy. Let me know if the audio becomes problematic again.
Yeah, I think some of the Meet Echo folks did notify the AV. I think part of the issue is you're coming in fairly loud, which may be causing. Oh. Okay, give that a try, Danny.
Testing.
Oh, that's actually better.
Okay, like I didn't feel like I was talking that loud before, so it was challenging for me to slow down and this will. Okay, good.
I am muted. Oh no, that was the first thing I did was unmuted. Yeah. Go ahead, Danny.
Okay. So actually a bit out of order. I think the roles and entitlements slides are a bit further. So yeah, we can either go and yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, so yeah, I've talked about this draft in a little more, I guess, informally at some of the previous IETF sessions. Just once more to sort of go over it. It's also been sent out to the mailing list previously. So the draft that's on the screen being shared right now is a draft intended to add new /roles and /entitlements endpoints and associated schemas so that SCIM clients can discover the available values that can be populated into the user resources, roles, and entitlements attributes. And the goal here is so that the SCIM client interacting with a SCIM server that uses roles and/or entitlements can proactively determine what are the acceptable values and what aren't. That way it can be more efficient and avoid sending requests that will obviously fail. Roles and entitlements both are some attributes that are very frequently sort of like validated, where they only accept a finite set of values as opposed to just being an open string that you can put whatever value you'd like into. So this draft has just recently been put into a call for adoption. So really this slide was just a sort of reminder and a call to, or call for assistance or whatever in if you have implemented SCIM and you use roles and/or entitlements, or you think you might in the future, please review this draft, provide feedback on, I guess the substance of it, if you think it's implementable, useful, etc. And then finally, there's a few other opportunities that have come both from feedback in the mailing list, feedback from other meetings that I've had that I figured I'd cover here. I've gotten feedback that there may be some interest in expanding these roles and entitlements resources to have a members attribute similar to a group, to essentially create almost like a two-mode system of managing roles. So if it's one user and you're trying to add 20 new roles to them, you can patch user.roles. Whereas if there's one new role, for instance, and you want to go add a large number of users to be a member to that, you could add them directly into the roles.members attribute, obfuscating away the fact that you'd have to go target the correct role inside of that. But I've seen similar thoughts recently, even around some other things as well. I guess like users.groups as a suggestion. People who have implemented SCIM clients or SCIM servers wanting the ability to, if you're going to go add a user to 50 new groups, right now you have to make 50 new patch requests or do a bulk request. So it's an interesting, I guess, dynamic not only for roles and entitlements, but potentially something for us to consider for a future version of the SCIM standard as well, if we were to expand the capabilities inside of the core schema protocols, or the core schema specification rather. I think also there's probably a need for whether in this draft or in a revision of the core schema RFC to provide a little bit clearer guidance on usage of the sub attributes inside of the roles and entitlements attributes, with specific focus on type. Although I think primary could use it a little bit as well. Right now, I don't think it's very clear to implementers on what the type attribute is meant to represent. And there are some implementations where I've seen where I think what they've landed on makes sense. But it would be nice to actually have explicit guidance, as right now any complex attribute in the schema, or at least most of them, I don't want to say any, but most of the complex attributes in the SCIM core schema RFC have the same set of sub attributes, type, primary, value, display. But across emails, addresses, actually addresses doesn't fall into that, so roles, entitlements, all those, I think there's potentially different uses for each of them. So and then I guess one final thing that was also came up of sort of representing with those roles and entitlements resources, things that are either prerequisites. So in order to have role A, you must have already assigned this user role B or C, or assign it at the same time. And then sort of the opposite of this role cannot be granted if this other role is also there, or you can shift that over to entitlements as well. So I'll probably include some or all of those other opportunities in the next version of the draft, which I guess may come after the call for adoption finishes. But yeah, if anybody has any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear them, either here or on the mailing list or privately.
Yeah, I mean, just as a reminder, we did put out a call for adoption, call for interest for this draft. So the idea is for you to provide comments on the current draft and to assess readiness for adoption. And I think I put the end for the call for adoption towards the end of the month, trying to give us an extra week, given that we're here.
Yeah, it was something like November 28th or 30th.
Yeah, I tried to give it an extra week or so just because we're meeting here. Okay.
Yeah. That's all I've got for roles and entitlements. I forget the order of things, but I'll.
Well, yeah, I put them in the order that you gave them to me.
Oh,
So
no, yeah.
the next one is the reference value and
Okay.
location.
So you can just scroll up one. Cool. Yeah. So this draft is a bit rougher still. So previously I've faced a challenge, and this is actually very similar in what the intent is behind that roles and entitlements draft, where attributes that are present on a resource may only accept values from from a predefined list. Just as an example, the enterprise user attribute cost centers. Well, businesses generally predefine their cost centers, and I shouldn't be able to go type in, banana or purple and put that as the value for cost center. It's not going to be helpful for whatever downstream system is consuming that data. So this draft adds a few new attributes to the schema definition. That's the URN, IETF, params, SCIM schemas, core 2.0 schema. So it's the properties that define any given attribute. And those properties effectively allow you to communicate and say, this attribute, A, it only accepts a limited set of values versus just accepting anything. And those values are searchable based on XYZ resources, attribute, A or B or C or whichever. So, the user dot manager or the users at the user resources manager dot value sub attribute only accepts values of the user resources ID attribute. This is actually, it's explained in the schema like RFC, but it's only explained sort of in text and not in a machine understandable way. And so this aims to provide a sort of a automatable, discoverable way to handle that. And I see Dean has his hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say Dean's done the queue.
Hi, Dean Sachs from Amazon. Danny, I noticed there was no way to filter, like in your manager example, like on a parameter, is a manager or is in a certain role. Is that something you see you want to add to the spec at some point? Because I see a need in a large system where I may not want every user to come back as a potential manager in this referential value. I want to get a subset of those users. So is that something you're looking at, or is that something we would add somewhere else?
So I think that would probably be something that you could add somewhere else, perhaps as a new attribute, either in the core, or I guess it would be in the enterprise schema extension, or just a new extension in itself. Something it could be a Boolean like is manager. I think this draft is aiming to be a little more agnostic, where manager is the super easy example based on what exists in the spec today. I off the top of my head, I don't know how we would incorporate that into just these few attributes or schema properties that are there. But I think it's a very valid problem to go solve, probably just with a Boolean or something.
Yeah, Danny, I guess if you took a step back and instead of looking at like an is manager attribute, just a general filtering capability so that when you are looking for those referential values, you are able to filter that to a certain subset of all values, as opposed to every, in the case of managers, and you're looking at all the users, instead of returning all of users, return users who meet a certain set of characteristics.
Oh, yeah, I see it now.
Okay.
Yeah, I won't try to solve the problem live here, but I understand what you're saying, and I think there are probably solutions to that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like, Dan, you're asking more in the search or query, which may be a different draft. So there's the, so Danny, it gets to the question of, can that be achieved through the cursor paging? I know it can be achieved through the SCIM events, potentially, right?
Right, and so the question, I guess, is where does it get pulled in? Does it get pulled in here? Does it get pulled in somewhere else? Happy to work with Danny offline on this.
Okay.
Thank you.
You might reach out to Phil Hunt too. So he's got some experience and, yeah. All right.
Yeah, and then just to sort of finish this slide and topic off, actually out of a conversation that I was having last week with the dean and a few other people, there's sort of a broader question, and I'll pose this out to the mailing list as well. But are there other new schema properties that are needed? The example that came to the top of the discussion that we were having last week was around cardinality. So for and I hope I'm using the right word there, but for multi-valued attributes. So we have the ability to say, is something single valued or is it multi-valued? But for multi-valued attributes, we do not have a way to express how many values it can accept. Like you can accept 2 different values for emails, for instance. It's a multi-valued attribute, but maybe you don't want to accept infinite values for emails. And even beyond cardinality, I think there's probably other things that are worth looking into trying to represent. But I think we then also are going to get into the problem of like over complicating things, perhaps. So I think it's a thin line to toe, or whatever the expression is.
You've got Pam on the queue, by the way.
Yeah, go ahead, Pam.
So I do have another question about the referential value. I mean, obviously in a programming language, this would be a variable, right? Again, and it would populate a dropdown, really, the way that you've framed this. It is also a call out to what could be a completely foreign server. So do you feel like there's security limitations that need to be added to this draft so that, for example, you could only perform a get on the same SCIM server that is hosting the API?
The way that this draft is written, it only allows for describing like that referential value if it is represented on the same SCIM endpoint, either on the same resource type or another resource type. I hadn't actually considered the problem of like representing the data somewhere else, or like I sort of had at least of it's a possibility, but I didn't attempt to solve that or even really cover it at all inside of this draft because it was more complicated than I had the energy or brain power to attempt to solve when I was writing this. So yeah, I guess the sort of lingering question, which I will again pose to the working group, would be, is there a need for a more descriptive set of properties on the schema like properties definition? And maybe should this draft, either this draft directly or a new draft start up to try to solve that broader problem if there's actually agreement that it is a problem. And yeah, that's all I have on this topic.
Okay. So Danny, I presume you're still evolving the draft, right? So we can solicit feedback and comments.
Yes.
Before we can do an adoption. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not looking to put this up for adoption quite yet.
Yep. Well, it sounds like that. Okay. So if you're done with that one, we're into the last one, cursor paging.
Yep, we are. I do not see Matt Peterson on the call, unfortunately.
That is correct.
So I will attempt to represent this one myself. So if you could, sorry, go ahead.
You have 2 slides for this, which...
start with the top one, so scroll up twice. Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah, that is the correct one. Okay, so status update on cursor-based pagination. We have a version 01 draft, which is published. The version 00 was published back in, I think it was 2017. And just recently, within the past 6 to 12 months or so, has it become a little more popular, and it's sort of become the talk of the town. If you just look at how much time we spent in the last 2 SCIM meetings, actually. So version 01 added some like just like syntax fixes in the examples where are certain things that should be there were missing, like what is it, like the total results counter, that sort of thing, like just very like baseline sort of boring fixes. And then a few new changes were made based on feedback on the mailing list. A previous cursor attribute or sort of parameter was added, which essentially you can now bidirectionally go back and forth if the implementation decides to implement previous cursor rather than only moving forward. And then we've made some changes to the service provider config entry to better describe does the SCIM server support index-based pagination, cursor-based pagination, or both, or I guess potentially neither, although that one seems really messy. Matt and I sort of want to, so like this draft specifically outlines cursor-based pagination, but we also wanted to have some flavor of just being like an expanding of pagination in general. And so like adding the new service provider config information that actually also lets you detail things that may only you may only actually support index-based pagination. But even just being able to outline that and make it discoverable, we think is helpful for the big picture and discoverability and all of that. And starting with version 01, I've joined as a co-author on this alongside Matt Peterson. We are currently working on a version 02 that I think will come out shortly, maybe this week or next week or whichever. So if you have any feedback on cursor-based pagination, either the version 01 or the 02 that comes out, version 02 won't be massively different from 01. We would love to hear it. And if you could, Aaron, move down to the next slide. So at the request of the chairs, so for anybody who's attended any of the last few like IETF SCIM meetings, we have spent a substantial amount of time debating sort of the necessity of an expansion to pagination, whether or not there is overlap with the currently adopted SCIM events draft, which profiles security event tokens plus SCIM, sort of nested as a payload inside. And then I've also thrown in, because it's become more relevant and it's always been part of this conversation as well, the concept of any sort of like change detection or a delta query mechanic, which there is no draft for, but there is intention to write at some point in the future. So previously expressed concerns about the coexistence of these drafts, specifically pagination SCIM events we'll focus on right now, has been that pagination, and so this would be the other side of the argument, not that the one that I support, would be that pagination or a larger like cursor-based pagination model is unnecessary, because if a large set of results are present, you can actually just feed them all sort of like piecemeal through an event stream as outlined in SCIM events. This doesn't actually solve, like it's not suitable for a lot of SCIM implementations. And so I've sort of tried to profile the pros and cons, or like the relevant points of each of these models. So with a cursor-based pagination, I should probably not have just called the top one pagination. That's a little vague. So it's very helpful for an efficient retrieval of results, either a subset of results, based on a query, or all results. It is needed for clients to be able to efficiently get like that initial set of data. So let's say you're a SCIM client and you're getting your data for the first time. How do you, I guess it's not the sort of the right model in Matt and I's opinion to try to feed that all through a SCIM event hub. It also requires substantially more like infrastructure investment. You need inbound connectivity rules as or inbound connectivity like flow as like a server running and all that stuff as a SCIM client, which today a client can operate entirely just with outbound connectivity. And whether you're trying to sort of seed that initial set of data, or just if you're running an application or a service and you've had an issue, like who hasn't had a bug or a regression or something like that, and your data is no longer trustworthy and you need to pull it again. Being able to just do like a get/users and paginate them is sort of much more efficient and reliable, and honestly simpler than hooking up an event stream and trying to flow it all through. So that being said, we do actually see the value in SCIM events. It's probably just in a narrower use case that has been argued in some of our previous meetings. So SCIM events essentially reverses the flow for anybody unfamiliar. It reverses the flow of the sort of that traditional like client server model, whereas normally the client is reaching out to the server, it's making requests, and if it doesn't ask for something, it's not going to find out. So if a connection is set up for like a sort of a backflow of events from what would normally be considered a SCIM server or service provider back down to the party that would normally be the client, that allows the SCIM service provider to reach out to the client and tell them, hey, this thing has happened. And this, it's sort of configurable to like what level of sensitivity you want, but the super like useful use case that we see, God, that's a useful use case, that we see is around sort of those urgent high priority changes. So let's say that an account needs to be disabled. So in the conversation of like provisioning data from some sort of human resources system or a human resources connected system into really anywhere else downstream. If HR wants to send a signal that says, hey, this user has been terminated, that's an urgent thing. Sometimes terminations are hostile. You can look at like layoffs that have happened at so many companies recently, and being able to have the service provider notify the client of, hey, either just this change has happened, because they can explicitly say like account they are no longer, like they've been terminated, or they can just say this object has had an update and you should check it again. Either way, it solves that problem. And you can expand that out to things like password changes, which could in turn trigger invalidating existing tokens in a service or whichever. You can expand it out further. Maybe just somebody's display name or whatever. If you want to actually use that, you can use that mechanism to notify of changes like ahead of time. And the like some of the feedback that I've managed to solicit, it pretty much says this is not universally implementable. So the inbound connectivity requirements are sort of somewhere between off-putting and a deal breaker for some implementations. Like some clients do not want to have to open up inbound connectivity. There's the costs both from like a development standpoint and infrastructure operational standpoint of running the like shared signals in event, like the things that would like receive these events and store them and all of that. It's making things more complicated, and that increased complexity is concerning. And I'll stop there. I see Daryl has raised his hand in the queue.
Hi, Daryl Miller, Microsoft. It's just worth, we do pretty much this at scale with Microsoft Graph API across all kinds of different resources, and we actually combine events and Delta Query, because one of the challenges with events is that you're sending data over the wire, so you need to be secure about where you're sending that data, and B, a customer who's receiving it could drop it on the floor and then they've lost that event. Whereas if you send SIM events, just events saying this has changed, you can then have the client come back with Delta Query and say, oh, you said something has changed. What has changed since I last queried it? So it might be worth looking at those two things more in combination, or at least that's a pattern that we've found works well where people want very reliable and efficient way of getting notifications, as long as the scale doesn't get too high, because you do have to receive the event and then make the secondary query. But we should talk more.
Yes, we should. I'm hearing you volunteer to help author a SCIM Delta query draft.
Yeah, I was like, okay, so you're proposing the third one, Delta query. But it's useful for you to note that as a practitioner, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
And then just a few key points on sort of the why of like a Delta query. So it's needed for synchronization, we'll call them use cases, to help improve efficiency. So using the use case of like an identity provider, Azure AD, Okta, whichever, is connected into a human resources provider, and the human resource provider is providing all of the user information that in turn is used to make decisions about, does an account get created, updated, deleted, any of those. For when you start hitting really large scale companies with hundreds of thousands or millions of users in their HR system, between contractors and whatnot, you run into issues where honestly even SCIM events, it's going to be like a fire hose. And just purely doing, like, let's say a get/users, what paginated, or if you're getting the raw set of data. If you're doing get/users and there's a million users, that clearly doesn't work, so you need the pagination. But even then, even if you're trying to paginate a set of a million users and you really only want the ones that have changed, you need that ability to just say, give me the ones that have changed since the last time I asked for this. And between the various concerns about SCIM events and really just, I think, problems of scale, this is not like SCIM events in place of a Delta query isn't something that Matt and I see as being feasible. Excuse me. And I've solicited other feedback that also aligns there. So I just sort of covering where our minds are at. And as far as solving the Delta query problem, I don't know that either Matt or I, especially me, are the right people, or at least the only people. I think we need a larger set of people involved to solve this. This is a slightly more complicated technical challenge than some of the other ones, perhaps. But the current front runner of ideas to solve it seems to be some sort of watermark-based system with some sort of opaque token representing from the service provider when that to return all changes since X. And that takes favor over just going off of, say, the meta.lastModified, because especially in distributed cloud systems, you can run into problems where small amounts of time drift can create inconsistent results. Essentially, time in most of these systems is not monotonically increasing, and because of that, just it's better instead of using an actual like date time to use that opaque token that may ultimately still represent a date time internally, but it gives a little more flexibility and for the implementer to provide the token, which in turn can behind the scenes lead to whatever the most sort of reliable results are. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful to people. This one doesn't really have a direct request for feedback, although if anybody has feedback or thoughts or whatever, happy to hear them. This conversation has also mostly been, I think, covered over the mailing list in a long series of emails. I believe that no, I guess I already said for pagination, I think we'll within the next few weeks or a month or whichever, we may try to put this up for a call for adoption as well. And that is all I have.
did you want to talk about your upcoming work slide?
Oh, yes, I forgot about that slide. Thank you. Yeah, so just as a sort of a high level overview, so I've been trying to sort of help make sure that we're making progress on a lot of the various items that exist in the working group's charter. So some of the previous drafts are covering pieces. Some of them are a little bit of a stretch. We use that one line about just extended schemas and go from there, solve problems. But some of the upcoming work that I at least intend to focus on and try to generate drafts for, and I'm being public about this here because if anybody is interested in any of these, please, for the love of your deity of choice, reach out and we can work together. So human resources schema. Essentially a generalized human resources like worker or employee representation. Intentionally, at least what I and what based on what I know and have learned, this should not just be an extension to the user schema, because a worker or an employee or whatever your label is may be different from a user. Like a human being in an HR system does not mean that one account is created for them. It could be 0 accounts, could be 1, could be 50. And just providing that employee data and then letting the connected systems decide how to react to that is the goal there. And the uber goal for the human resources schema is to actually standardize how HR providers can represent their data, which will in turn allow any HR provider, whether it's a really big one, whether it's a new startup, they don't have to go design their own API. They don't have to go design their own API schema or anything, but then they also get the benefit of, even if they're a startup, they can go and they can be integrated with, because we will standardize that. And right now it's a big challenge in the industry of how to integrate with all of the human resources data sources that are out there. Delta query already mentioned, won't go into that. There's we've previously discussed and who knows when we'll actually pick up the pen, some sort of security best current practices document. And this is essentially just to in lieu of modifying these right now directly in the SCIM, I guess schema or protocol RFCs, because when we crack those open, it's a bit of a mess when it gets to do we increase the version of SCIM to like 2.0.1 or 2.1 or whichever. For now, we just want to look at writing a BCP to advise on things like dropping user password authentication, not using the password attribute in like non-legacy or any like internet-facing or like SaaS scenarios, just to give folks a nudge towards aligning with more modern security practices. And then we could sort of call the last one the reference attribute URL authorization, the photo problem. So at least across internet connected like SCIM service providers or clients, implementation and syncing of like the profile pictures, for instance, with the photos attribute is a really, really low adoption rate. And my take on why that is that the so the SCIM spec defines reference URLs, and this is not to be confused with the referential values draft earlier, but a reference URL or URI. So essentially, you can say this user's profile picture is at HTTP whack colon whack whack whatever the URL is. Nothing in the SCIM spec talks about authorization for those URLs. So in internet connected systems, if your cloud IDP is trying to sync to a SaaS app and provide pictures, you can provide the URLs, but there's no way standardized to say, and here's the token or whichever that you use to go access these URLs and get these pictures. And that is a problem that I would like to solve.
There's a couple of comments in the chat. I think Daryl, are you here in the room? Do you want to repeat that in for the room, or?
I can remember what I said.
Oh, we can read it to you.
Well, there you go.
The comment was about the Delta token mechanism being expensive.
Yeah, so you mentioned about using like a watermark token, and it is a effective way of doing it that can provide high fidelity delta. The challenge is you're putting a burden on the server to keep track of all of those delta tokens, and it can get expensive for servers. So it would be worth having potentially multiple, where one is just the last modified type thing for scenarios where the data is not as volatile. Or it's not as critical that if a data is dropped it's a lower bar to entry.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. That makes sense. So, as part the overarching like use case that I am trying to address with at least start with the Delta query topic is around, actually we'll call it the high fidelity things. We'll go back to the use case of like the human resources based provisioning, where you really want to catch every result. And I think you are correct, though, that we need to have multiple options, both from a like cost to implement side and I guess a fidelity side. Although, if it was the same cost to implement, why not use the higher fidelity? But yeah, I think most of the human resources providers, to keep on that use case, already have some form of a Delta, like a watermark based token system. So it's not a stretch for them, at least. But yes, we should also outline doing things like meta.last modified, which are already like sort of they're there but not explicitly, or maybe there is an explicit example in one of the current specs. But yeah, I agree. And then,
So if I
sorry,
can go back to your slide comparing these three, can you make sure that in the like the pagination draft, that the use cases for why that is relevant is captured in the intro to that? That's usually a good place to like set the context for the draft, because it does, like what I'm hearing here from you and from others in the room, but I know it's been part of the discussions elsewhere, is that there is some concern about overlapping use cases being solved by multiple drafts. So we want to make sure that that the use cases for each one are clear, so that someone reading this knows, if I have this problem, then I'm going to go follow this set of instructions, and hopefully they're not thinking that they have to do everything for every use case, because I think that is the problem that people are concerned about. So just clarifying what is the actual problem being solved before we get into the mechanism in the drafts.
Okay, yeah, I've heard your feedback. And yeah, in the chat, Dean chimed in just to say that essentially he agreed with Daryl. Client and server need to maintain state. Can we use larger grain timestamp instead? Which I think it really boils down to, is it sort of a push versus a pull thing? If you're looking to see what's changed in, and maybe I'm not classifying it right, but I think no, maybe I am. I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, Dean. I don't know if you have any wider or more clear opinions on that.
Dina, are you in the room? Yeah.
Dean Sachs from Amazon. Danny, what I was suggesting is that we generally don't need, I can't say this always, but in many cases we don't need such fine-grained specificity that time drift is going to be problematic. I can't say that in all cases. I think if there are cases where that's a problem, then maybe you use the watermark-based method. But timestamps may be appropriate for many implementations. And so that gets back to your point of multiple different mechanisms for doing Delta queries, not just settling on the single one.
Thank you.
Anjali, you're in the queue.
Hi, Danny. This is Anjali from AWS. I have a question regarding your HR schema extension.
Mhm.
Can you a little bit explain like what's the use case of why we want to do like, and would it be more of an extension of a role that a user may have in the HR system? Or yeah, that's
Sorry, go ahead. Okay, so the use case there is more and more sort of identity system designs have started to shift in, let's say the past 5 years or so, where human resources is deemed the true source of authority for the state of most of your user data. So whether it's first name, last name, what city they live in, their office, anything of that sort, are they employed or terminated, is sort of the primary location for that is human resources, and it in turn flows down to other things, identity providers, learning management systems, any other connected places. And a big challenge that exists when trying to move that HR data into other systems is that right now the human resources providers all have generally like disparate and proprietary schemas, and so
Yeah,
there's not a scale mechanism. So good.
Yeah, Danny, I was just going to add to Anjali's question. It was more to get better affinity, as Danny is saying, that the HR database is broader than just the role and the need to have that stronger mapping and affinity. So the examples were, for instance, adding pronouns, he, she, they, sorry, right? As well as some other potential fields.
yeah, and that could be the extension of a role itself, like a specialized role which says, okay, this is a worker or an employee, and a user is taking a role of a worker.
So
and employee.
for that, I would volunteer you to work with Danny on that.
Yeah, sure.
There was just recognition that we needed to extend the SCIM schema to allow
Okay,
for those fields to be recognized.
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Which I would say that at least the angle that I've been looking to approach this from has been to represent the human resources data in such a way that whatever the system is that's consuming it can connect to multiple human resources systems, essentially build once, connect to many, utilize an open standard, and then that system, whether it's an identity provider or whichever, can make its own decisions about what to do. So things like this value in human resources means this user has this role. Well, like if we're talking about the role attribute on the user resource in SCIM, at the end of the day, that should be up to essentially look at the HR data and then your own logic in whatever your app that's consuming the HR data. That leads you to decide what to do with that data. Different systems care about different attribute values. Some don't care at all. But yeah, this is the last slide. This is truly now. I think this is all I've got. The first time was a false
No, this is great. This is work to come. So
Yep.
we look forward to that. So I think that was it on the agenda. So I could do a call for any other business, topics of discussion, going once, going twice. All right, so we may give you, okay, I can't do the math. 41 minutes back. So there are a couple of drafts out there. There's one for a call for adoption. So I encourage all of you to read and provide comments so that we can progress the work that we've chartered to do.
And I would also like to ask for more comments on the options that Annie laid out about the uses for events versus pagination for syncing. Just if you have any experience with deploying these, the experience is very welcome as comments, so we can make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Okay, I think with that, we can conclude. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you those who got up a little early and participate remotely. Oh, one more.
thing I forgot is that we do have time scheduled for a side meeting on Wednesday at 4 p.m. here, local time. So it's in a small room, so it won't be like this. And we can use that time to chat about any of the existing documents or any of the things that came up today. I would love to use that time to iron out some of the details. I have set up a Zoom for that as well to join remotely. So if you go to the side meeting page linked from the main IETF115, you will find the Zoom link from there. So for everybody joining remotely, and I set it at 4 p.m. here so that it's not too early in the morning on the West Coast of the US. So hope to see some of you there. That's yeah, Wednesday.
Thank you, everyone. Phil's not here.
Yeah.
But I can. So I can say that, but I have to do it as a note.
I agree with that.
I'm trying not to be. When I get home, I am calling the Apple Store.